Okay, delighted to have been joined by Alan Brouder of Oxfam GB. Alan, I just wanted to get started by asking you, what are your expectations from this conference?
Well, this conference is all about communicating community-based adaptation, and I think that's one of the key challenges for everybody in the practitioners community, is figuring out what works at a community level and then being able to share that information and that knowledge, because so many people are working in isolated areas in remote parts of the world, and we really need to capture that information, capture that learning and capture the experience, and then be able to share it across both within countries and across countries, within organizations, the private sector, government. Everybody is trying to figure out what works at the moment, and so this particular conference this year is trying to understand the communication aspect of that and how we learn from each other. So I'm hoping that I can learn myself personally and build my own knowledge, but also meet others and learn from them also.
And I know you went on one of the field trips. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you picked up there?
Sure. Well, we went down to the very south of Vietnam, to the Mekong Delta. And there we met with the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, and they showed us some of the work that they're doing. The specific site that we visited was a dam, because saltwater intrusion is a major issue, obviously, in the Delta region. That's part of a wider climate change action plan for Ben Tre province, where Oxfam also has a presence, and that's why I was particularly interested to go to that region. So the major issue for them in terms of climate change is sea level rise in particular, and access to freshwater use. So the government of Vietnam and all of its partners are concentrating heavily on that issue in that region. We also saw a mangrove seedling nursery, which was initiated by WWF, and then they've encouraged the government to also make a contribution to that. So there's an aspiration to replant mangroves as a sort of first line of defense against typhoons and extreme weather events, and that would be, I suppose, the first step in protecting people's livelihoods in that area. So they have a huge ambition to scale that up and protect a very, very long length of the coastline in the Delta. And then we went and we visited projects by Oxfam working with smallholders, both in terms of improving their livelihoods through introducing new varieties of crops and helping smallholders to integrate into the market. We visited a watermelon a farm and met with communities who were receiving more access to fresh water through rainwater harvesting. And so collectively, I think all of these different elements are adding up to the beginning of a more sort of resilient livelihood. But I think, again, one group was concentrating in one area, another group was concentrating on another area, and I hope that they were learning from each other. What we really need is a sort of a coherent plan where everybody understands what their contribution is doing, because in adapting to climate change there are so many variables and so many things that people need to address at the same time, which is a major challenge. But certainly I could see amongst the group that we were with that one group had a particular expertise in one area, another group had an expertise in another area, so hopefully that joins up the theme of the conference around communicating CBA.
And you mentioned some government support for a couple of these initiatives. Do you think that community-based adaptation has been kind of incorporated into mainstream policy yet? And if not, what needs to happen to make sure that it is?
I think it's very different in different countries. Some countries have wonderful policy environments and they have a fantastic legal framework. They have climate change policies in place at the national level. What really needs to happen in practice is for those plans to be constantly revisited and to be informed by the experience of communities. That's easier in some countries than it is in others. And also it's a great challenge for many governments who are trying to integrate climate change awareness and risk management across all of their departments and ministries. Traditionally it's been seen as an environmental issue, but of course it isn't. It affects the economy, it affects infrastructure, it affects services, it affects everything. So that's been a great challenge for government officials, and I think it's great to see significantly more government officials here than in the past, and that's very promising. That link between communities and their local representatives is a key area, I think, especially for Oxfam, and it's one that we have found very, very important in building the capacity to adapt, is empowering communities to be able to help their public officials to understand the issues, and then also to be able to demand a certain level of support, because they will not be able to adapt on their own with the scale and the speed at which climate change is happening. That link then between the national level and the local level is another area that we need to be working on a lot. A lot of our advocacy work in the past, not just Oxfam but more broadly civil society, has concentrated at the global level or at the international level. And I think what we really need to do is, as part of our community-based work, to have a much stronger advocacy component at that level, so that we're really linking communities with their public officials, both in both directions. And I think that's slowly starting to happen more in some places than in others.
And just finally, this conference is obviously looking at lessons learned, and Oxfam's been working in this area for a while now. What big trends do you see in terms of adaptation and climate change? What's the movement, and what are the lessons that are being learned already?
I think for the first few years we were struggling to figure out the relationship between reducing disaster risk and adapting to climate change. And there have been a lot of strong opinions about whether or not these two things are really connected and how they're connected, or whether or not adaptation is in some way a brand new field, a brand new approach. There's a real challenge in addressing immediate short-term needs around the increase in the number and intensity of extreme weather events, which of course naturally is the key concern for communities. And then the slow onset changes, the gradual changes in sea level rise, in precipitation and the patterns, and also in temperature rises, and what the implications are for that for sustaining particular kinds of livelihoods over time. I think now, as Margareta Wallström of UNISDR said in her opening remarks this morning, we don't need to overcomplicate that. We know that disaster risk reduction is essential as a first step. And I think that's becoming more and more accepted, that it's not really a separate approach or a separate issue, but that we need to go beyond that. We need to build in somehow ways to address long-term, slow onset changes as part of that package. And I think we're slowly moving towards that. So the communities of practice, if you like, from DRR and adaptation have often been should we say, kind of coming at the issue from maybe a slightly different perspective. But I think increasingly we realize that we are all part of the same community, and we just have to figure out how to do that better.
Alan, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you.